Hello, I'm Dan Mars with Series 7 Specialists, and today we're going to be covering the Series 6. If you have not downloaded the outline, be sure to go to the website series7specialists.com and go to the Series 6 page and download. There's a link there where you can just click on it. It'll pull up, you can download it, print it out. What we have done for the class is that we've actually taken it down to an office supply place and had them bind it like this. And if you print it duplex, then basically what you have is that you have space out on the margins where you can take notes. So I'd really recommend that you do that. There's a lot of stuff that we cover. You're going to want to take real good notes, and you're going to want to refer to those notes, because the things that you see at 10 o'clock in the morning, by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, now what was he saying? Made a lot of sense back then, but you know, we need to do that. So take lots of notes, refer back to your notes, and like I said, what we want to do is to really equip you for the test. When I first started teaching this, I loved to teach people and have them learn. Man, I threw that away real quick. Okay? The goal is to pass the test. So the goal is to get the minimum number of correct answers, right? In fact, I'll go one step further than that. I don't care if you get the minimum number of correct answers, as long as you get the minimum number of correct letters. So we'll be talking about test-taking tips, sometimes how to, what in the world is this? Well, let me use one of those test-taking strategies that we talked about in class. And hopefully we'll get a few extra letters that we just kind of get into just by being smarter than the question. Remembering there's only so many ways that you can write a multiple choice question. So some of this stuff won't be content related, but it will all be test related, okay? All right, so anyway, speaking up, starting out, just first crack out of the box. We want a general discussion of the test. There are certain concepts that are just critical for you to keep in mind. And so these really, like I say, just as you go through your test, just be sure that you keep these in mind. They're overlying everything that you do when you're in the testing center. So first of all, the importance of definitions. Now you've heard the old expression, oh yeah, Bob can talk the talk, but he can't walk the walk. Well, this test is the exact opposite of that, okay? They're not going to let you walk the walk unless and until you can talk the talk. If you don't know the definitions, you're hung. I mean, that's just the way the world works, okay? So a good exercise for you, it's boring as heck, so break it up, okay, into little chunks, about so much. Your textbooks will have a glossary. Go back through the glossary. Now don't read the darn thing, okay? That'll put you to sleep just like that, okay? But what I want you to do is to go through and just say, okay, now here's the starting with the A's. There's this term, I know that term I know that term I know that. Maybe I better brush up on this a little bit and read that. Okay, do I understand that term? Break it up into about 6 or 8 chunks and just go through, like that, just to make sure that you're familiar with those definitions. The second thing is, if it works for me, it works for them. Okay? So, in fact, like when we talk about corporate debt, any kind of debt, you know what the difference is between you borrowing $2,000 and Procter & Gamble borrowing $2 billion? Several zeros. That's the only difference. So if you had your choice of paying 5% interest or 1.5% interest, which would you do? Yeah, you'd pay 1.5%, okay? We didn't follow the turnip truck last week. And so guess what Procter & Gamble would choose? Exactly the same thing. Exactly the same thing. So if it works for me, it works for them. It's just we're talking about a few extra zeros. Take the macro down to micro, and it really helps to explain things. Supply and demand drives everything having to do with prices. If the supply is low, the demand is high, you're going to have a sky-high price. I mean, what is it that real estate agents say? Location, location, location. Why? Because the demand is like so in this location, and it's like so in that location. Guess what they like to sell? Because there's only so much of it to go around. Supply and demand. Winners and losers. We don't really create or destroy anything in this industry. All we do is just kind of shuffle things from one pocket to the next. So if somebody's winning, somebody else is losing. So who gets helped, who gets hurt? Sometimes that's important to keep in mind. Okay, because the reward to one is the risk to the other. Okay, the conservative to one is the aggressive to the other. And if they're opposite parties in that transaction, then they're going to have opposite points of view. The principle of the exchange, okay? Now, what I mean by this is that, again, we don't really just create anything. Anytime that something goes this way, there's something that comes back the other way. And so if there's, it's easy to see in the grocery store. You got a gallon of milk. Guess what? You get the milk, they get the money. It's the same thing here, though, even though we're talking about intangibles. Now, if we take it a little bit more complicated, and like say go to a car dealer, okay, we can get a base model car, and we'll only give them a little bit of money, right? But if they put air conditioning on that car, if they put a Sirius radio in that car, okay, if they put the fancy interior in that car, guess what's going to happen? More stuff is coming to us. More stuff's got to go that way. That's what I talk about. Anytime that you give something, you get something. And that's the way the world works. Okay? So if we're talking about a bond, well then, as the issuer, in order to have the right to the borrower, in order to have the right to borrow that much money, I'm going to have to pay you so much interest. But what if I give you a little convertible feature? What are you going to give me back? Maybe a little bit of that interest? Yeah. So just keep that in mind. We always exchange something for something else. Two things of value, one going each direction. And the effect of a fingerprint. Now that's it. If you, again, these things are intangibles. But if you think about them as tangible objects, then when something goes this way and boom, the public puts its fingerprint on something for the first time, changes totally the nature of that. I mean, it's just, are any of you familiar with U.S. Mint proof coins? Okay, basically what you can do is you can buy from the U.S. Mint proof coins, never been touched. They've got this protective coating on them. They're in little plastic things. And if you take it out of its protective plastic container and touch it, it's no longer a proof coin. It's uncirculated. It has a high value, but it's no longer a proof because it's got your fingerprint on it. The same thing happens to a share of stock, to a bond. Okay? Anytime there's a fingerprint from the public, man, it changes the nature of that completely. And then taking words apart and taking terms apart. Great thing about the English language, okay, is that if you say it forwards, it tells you what it is. If you say it backwards, it tells you how it works. Okay? So like for instance, if you came on an expressway today, you got off on the exit ramp. What is that? Read it backwards. That's a ramp, a sloped surface where you what? Exit from the expressway. Okay? I mean, there's all kinds of examples like that. And so what does this mean? Read the darn thing backwards. And even the same thing with words. Like capitalization. What the heck does capitalization mean? Well, let's look at it. Let's break it apart. Capital means money. Eyes is a suffix that means to turn into. And ation is a suffix that means the process of. So what is capitalization? It's the process of taking something, pieces of paper that are otherwise basically worthless, and turning them into the money structure that we build a company on. Man, it's amazing, isn't it? Yeah, read those words backwards. Read the terms backwards, and they really help to give you some perspective, okay? Keep that in mind. Those are things that will help you out all the way through the test. So, speaking of capitalization, let's capitalize a corporation. There are only two choices that we've got, equity and debt. Now, there are all kinds of flavors. I mean, it's just like going into the ice cream store, you know? All kinds of flavors and all kinds of toppings and stuff like that. But when it gets down to the bottom line, you've got equity and debt, ownership and borrowing. That's it. Those are the only two choices that you've got. Equity is that ownership, and that stock certificate is given to the in exchange for the money that's invested. That stock certificate is basically the title to the company, and you own a certain portion of that company when you buy equity. That's a conservative capitalization. In other words, here's our winners and losers we were talking about earlier. From the company's perspective, it's very conservative because as a company, as a corporation, I have no obligation to pay you anything at any time if you invest in equity. I don't have to pay you dividends. I don't have to give you your money back. Who's taking the chances? You are. What are you wanting to happen? You're wanting that company to become more and more valuable, right? Yeah, exactly. Will it? I don't know. You're taking the chance on that, so it's an aggressive investment for you. See, we're opposite sides of that transaction. So my plus is your minus. My conservative is your aggressive. And the same thing with debt in reverse. What do you have with debt? You lent money to people. You know, let me borrow $5 for lunch. Okay, now you're not going to make me sign anything for $5, but if it was 500, yeah, I said, well, sure, I'll loan it to you, but sign here. That's what the company does. They sign on the dotted line. What do they say? They say, we will pay you X number of dollars of interest once every 6 months. We will then, on a certain date, pay you your money back. It's an IOU. Well, now what happens if they can't make enough money to pay that interest on an ongoing basis? Guess what? You can own the company, or at least whatever's left of it. Yeah, because you can foreclose on that company. They're taking a big risk. What if they can't pay back the principal when it comes due? Ooh, man, they're up a bad creek without a paddle. Okay? So it's conservative for you as an investor because you have that contractual guarantee that they provide. It's aggressive for them because they have that residual obligation. And see, there's another one of those winners and losers. What's the flip side of a guarantee? An obligation, and vice versa. So equity has no guarantee. It has no obligation. Debt has a guarantee. It has an obligation. And that's why it, like I say, you've got the opposite sides on debt and equity with regard to aggressive capitalization or conservative capitalization, aggressive investment or conservative investment. All right, and then finally, governmental units can only borrow. All right, so if we talk about treasury, we have to say which treasury is it that we're talking about. All right. If we're talking about the corporate treasury, then there is such a thing as treasury stock. But if we're talking about the U.S. Treasury, you know, I mean, a long time ago, they used to have this ad campaign that said, take stock in America, buy bonds. You guys probably don't remember it because it's been a long time since they've run that. But yeah, it's a good play on words, but it's very inaccurate. Okay, we're a government of the people, by the people, for the people. We all own as much of the government as we can possibly own right now by virtue of the fact we're citizens. We cannot own more of the government, nor, unless we denounce our citizenship, can we own less. So guess what? There is no equity that's issued by the federal government. And local and state governments and agencies, authorities are all the same way. All that they can do is borrow. So if you see Treasury and it's a U.S. Treasury, it's debt. Okay? If you see Treasury and it's a corporate Treasury, it's equity. And vice versa. If you see Treasury and it's equity, it's a corporation. Because those just go together. And make those associations, okay? We'll make associations all through the class. And you just take this and put it together with that, match them up. And that's going to be one of those test-taking tools that we can use. That if we see certain terms in the question, then it'll direct us to certain answers. So in any event, you know, keep that in mind, and what we'll do is that we'll make those associations all through the class. If you see the term up here in the question, guess what? If it's in only one answer, you match the darn things up. So if you see U.S. government and you see Treasury, 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 okay, guess what? You're going to have, well, in fact, I'm going to go ahead and do this. My favorite structure of a question is what I call a duck, 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 goose question. All right? So I've got myself going on, if you see U.S. government in the question, there's only one way that you can set that up with what we're talking about right now. Okay? All of the following could be issued by the U.S. government except Treasury bills, that's debt. Treasury notes, that's debt. Treasury bonds, that's debt. Treasury stock, that's equity. You know what you've got? You've got duck, 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 goose. That's what you've got. If you've got a duck, 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 goose answer set, guess what your answer is?
The goose.
Goose. That's it. Okay? So anyway, basically that's it. We're going to go ahead then and we'll wrap up this module for you, and then we'll be going into module 2 with corporate securities here in just a couple of seconds. So we'll see you on the next module, and glad to have you with us. Thank you.